You are now listening to Renaissance Soul.
Welcome to the first episode of Renaissance Soul, the podcast about Detroit music history. And for this episode, I wanted to do a deep dive into the history of Renaissance Soul, because it was originally a website that I started back in 2001, centered around the work of Jay Dilla, JD. And it grew, to just Detroit hip hop and then to Detroit music. Then I took a break, and now I'm bringing it back as a podcast. And we're gonna just really tackle specific subjects for that. But before we go into any of those subjects, I wanted to tell you my story about that website and what we're going to do and my connection to Detroit music as a whole. And what I wanted to do, because I was having a hard time like just sitting by myself telling the story, is that I wanted someone to interview me. So I went out and I got the perfect person. His name's Dan Charnas. He is a highly acclaimed hip hop journalist. He's the author of The Big Payback, the history of the business of hip hop. He's written for every publication back in the day. He worked for Profile Records and Deaf American Records. And he's just like a good dude. And when we're talking right now, he's actually in the middle of working on a book about Jay Dilla. So I want to welcome to Renaissance Soul, Dan Charnas. How you doing?
Hello. It's such an honor to be here with K-Fresh, the godfather of Dillology.
Dude.
You want to be real about it.
And it's funny now that when it comes to like Dilla information, it's just like as soon as social media hit and after he passed away, like all my work seemed like it got thrown to the wolves or something, because everybody just come up with their own stories and people still have like their third hand, fourth hand stories. And I know you're getting down to the bottom of that right now.
Yeah, well, listen, just for everybody out there, I've been working on this book on the life and legacy of Jay Dilla for about 3 years now. And that's how I, met K-Fresh. But really, I've known the work of K-Fresh for years, because it is that foundation, the first discography of Jay Dilla's work that, I've read on like the Stone's Throw website, and your Wikipedia page on Jay Dilla is essentially built on a lot of the knowledge that K-Fresh, accumulated over the years. So it's an honor to be on your podcast. It's an honor to talk a little bit about your story, and let's get started.
Right, let's get started, man.
All
let's
right.
talk about my early years, man.
Yes, let's talk about your early years. Are you going to refer to yourself in the third person too? Like, well, when K-Fresh was young.
No, I'm not that, whatever. I'm not.
All right. So, and again, I've spent the last, 2-3 years interviewing Detroiters and people from the surrounding area. And it is an incredibly special place. So tell me a little bit about, where in the area you're from. Tell me a little bit about your parents, where you went to school, your family. Just give us the place.
Yeah, I grew up right off of 8 Mile on the east side of town, Warren, Michigan. People, would learn about that city from Eminem and the movie 8 Mile and stuff like that. My life wasn't exactly like Eminem's, but there's a lot of things that were kind of underlined in that movie that I experienced. I know what the 8 Mile divide was, where north of 8 Mile is where the white people live, south of 8 Mile is where the black people live. and that was a strong presence when I was a kid, and I heard a lot of things, that's what, about Black people that were like very crazy. I didn't really understand it. I didn't really buy into it. So because at the same time, I'm seeing, like, we have these sports teams in Detroit and in Michigan. You have like the Bad Boys Pistons. You have, of course, you have like Barry Sanders. You have, everybody that's on the Tigers. You have the Fab Five from the U of M, and you're seeing all these, like, these great Black players doing good for the city. And then I'm also starting to, getting early steps of hip hop. I would, when I was a little kid, I was like really into like heavy metal and stuff like that, but my first love was Jimi Hendrix.
Wow.
So, and I was always an inquisitive kid. So I would read magazines and catch documentaries that were on TV about Jimi Hendrix. So I'm like seeing all this thing where I'm like, okay, I hear all this sort of racist things in like just society about Black people, but
So would you
I don't
say,
get it.
like, the middle school and the high school that you went to in Warren, would you say that, you were going to school with a lot of, white folks who had racist, bigoted attitudes and
Yeah,
lifestyles?
like actually, like I was in a part of Warren that where my school district was in the next city over, which was East Detroit, or now it's East Point. And yeah, I feel like a lot of them maybe didn't even realize they had bigoted views, but they did, So like it was just like, if you're, only time people crossed 8 Mile is like the drunks from on my side crossed over to go to the Piccadilly's, the liquor store, or go to the adult movie shop right there, or and then the only time like anybody south of 8 Mile came on the other side was to go to Wizards Arcade, which, shout out to Wizards Arcade, people will know what that is.
That's right.
You've been
And
around.
your mother wouldn't let you go to that arcade.
Exactly, because there's a lot. Exactly, and you know, and of course there might have been shit going down in Wizards Arcade, but there, it was just that thing, So yeah, there was just I I just didn't get it, because I was like, I know like Black people can't be that bad, and because I'm seeing all this great stuff, and I started getting into hip hop eventually, and this is probably around, I was like 12 years old when I was like really like getting into rap and hip hop. It was like around the time when the Chronic came out. Like the big radio, the radio stations here were 96.3, 97.7, and they were playing just that was probably, back in the last times when you had like real good hip hop stations, that were like digging deep, like, and I was just, I had my tape in my boom box, like, had pause taping, like recording all these dope jams that were coming on.
Who did you sort of have friends, colleagues who you came up with who shared your, your loves and
No,
your
the funny thing
preferences?
was, when I was a teenager, I didn't really know anybody that liked the stuff that I liked. There was, I really was like, I really was the hip hop kid at my schools. Like that was like my thing. I'd wear rap t-shirts like every day and stuff like that. Every once in a while I would bond over something. Like I was just talking with my friend Jeff, became friends in 8th grade, and me and our other friend Ray, who passed away many years ago, we really bonded over Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links. So like right when it came out, we
Purple
really
Tape.
bonded up that. But the thing was, all that at that same time, I was also like in tune to what was going on locally, because artists like the Insane Clown Posse and Esham and Naudis and the House of Crazies were actually very ubiquitous to my side of town. and
Right.
they were and this was before the term juggalo got, coined. This is before anybody had, like, ICP had any deals, this was when they were still had like a huge, they were just locally, but like they were all popular. And I was always, and like Isham was was the first rapper that I ever loved,
Right.
And
Were you
so
ever into the Awesome Dre's and that
I
that
didn't
first
get
generation of
I didn't get
Detroit
into I
hip
didn't
hop?
get into them until later on, maybe a few years later. It's when I started sort of the thing was really cool about that time in regards to going to like Isham shows or ICP shows or even Kid Rock shows at that time, is that they always had a lot of local openers. Some were bad, but some were good. And you started going down those rabbit holes of like, or just actually like listening to them, I think that's with anything with hip hop, you go down the rabbit hole of like, you look into the credits, see who's featured on there, see who they thank, see who they sampled. I did the same thing when it came to Detroit hip hop. And and I was always going to the record stores like, like Record Time in Roseville, Melodies and Memories in East Point, Hot Hits in Roseville. Those were like my main three. They were all on Gratiot. And sometimes I'm like a teenager, so I have to like, I'd go out with my mom, like grocery shopping, and like ask her to, stop there, or in the
I know
summertime.
that game.
Yeah. Or in the summertime, I would just walk there because it was only like, it was kind of a walk, but it was still like, I didn't have anything else to do. It's the summertime. I put my, Walkman in, go buy some tapes, then I got some new tapes to listen to on the way back,
Right.
So like that was my place there. And I was just kind of in a place where I was just like, I want to know more.
Right. Let me ask you a question. So you seem like you're maybe a little young for the rhythm kitchens and the hip hop shop.
Oh, totally was. And I was never that
Yeah.
person who went to stuff underage.
Right.
My mom wouldn't let me go out to be out like that.
At a certain point, you do start coming downtown, I think, to St. Andrews, right? So tell a little bit about how you begin to interact with the actual Detroit scene in real time.
It kind of goes like this. I remember going, well, first, I was starting to go to and I was always going to the record stores, but I really wasn't interacting with the DJs that were working there.
Right.
Because there was always DJs working at those, at like Melodies and Memories in Record Time. Always. It didn't matter what time. There was always known DJs working at those places.
Yep.
But I wasn't interacting with them because I was just going to the tape section, I was just going to the hip hop tape section. That's it, just shoot right there. But it wasn't until like maybe like my junior year of high school or senior year is when I started really like interacting with people. And I think it all kind of started like, one incident that really started was my senior year. I only went to school half a day because I had a co-op job. So I had this job like doing tech support for UPS software, and it was right over there on 7 Mile in Harper, like 7.5 in Harper, like in Harper Woods, And I was working with a lot of people that would just go out to the hip hop scene. They weren't rappers or anything. They would just go out to the hip hop scene. And I started talking about what I knew, and then blah, blah, blah. They were really shocked that this little skinny white kid knew all this shit about hip hop. Mm-hmm. And I remember there's this one guy, he was actually a part of the scene though. He was like a musician. His name was Gerald Jeter. He let me borrow the Slum Village, like volume 1 tape. And I had seen this tape before, but I didn't buy it because it was like mad expensive, and you know how it looks. And I was just like, I'm not going to pay $13-14 for this. Now I'm like kicking myself that I never did. But he let me listen to it. And I'm like, oh, boom, yo, like, I like this, this is dope. And at that time I had already bought 5 Elements, yesteryear's EP that was fully produced by JD. And that was Mud, Thyme, and Proof, who would later be in D12. So I already had that tape, I had a bunch of other like hip hop tapes. But it was a lot of those conversations I had at work, but then I started meeting people at the record stores, like at Melodies and Memories was a guy named Jeffrey Woodward. He's still there. He's he's more into UK garage. He's that type
Right.
of DJ. Like he's the man here when it comes to UK garage.
Right.
And then at the same time, like shortly after, House Shoes started working at Melodies and Memories.
Right.
And this is the same time I'm working at this job, and people at my job had already told me about House Shoes. They're like, yo, you gotta meet House Shoes. Like he's like the blackest white dude you'll ever meet. and, and I was like, all right. So like I met him at Melodies and Memories, and we just started chopping it up about JD stuff and about everything. And he was a big wealth of knowledge about the local scene and everything.
Right.
And at the same time, the thing was around those times, House Shoes was going back between Melodies and Memories and Record Time, back and forth, working at both. He would leave one to go to the other, then leave one to go back to the other. So I was constantly going back.
Street corner music tenure.
Yeah, he also had tenures there, but like there's this time when he was just going back and forth between those two and
Right.
nowhere else, So I was always at the record stores then, like always, to the point where like at Melodies, one of the owners yelled at me like, "Look, you can't just be coming in here every day and not buying anything." But most of the times I was buying things or giving something to Shoes, and House Shoes made him apologize to me for that. I was like. But I'm cool with all of them and everything. But at the same time, like that's where like. But then at the same time, I started going down to St. Andrew's Hall for their 3 Floors of Fun, and this is like the death rattle of 3 Floors of Fun. This is when it was transitioning into to being on the radio too. But House Shoes was still spinning there, but they were putting him in the basement or on the 3rd floor.
Right.
So there still was a hip hop presence. And even the main floor, which was, geared towards the radio, was still popping at that time. Right. Because that was like 99, 2000 and 2001. That's when you had like the Dipset stuff and
right.
like all that, all that stuff like that came after like.
So we're really talking about the mainstreaming of hip hop, right? And the fact that the Jay-Z's of the world are becoming so much more accessible.
Yeah.
To like the non-specialist DJs and to pop radio, right? Now hip hop, what we used to call hardcore hip hop, those artists are getting played on pop radio stations. So it's a transition. It's a transition that's happening all over the country, but you're feeling it in Detroit around the time that you're coming into St. Andrews in '98.
Yeah, and at the same time, I'm seeing that Detroit's finally getting shine too, mostly because of Eminem. And you're seeing like the whole city go nuts, you're seeing every other person wanting to be a rapper, you're seeing people like, well, I don't know where they're getting their money. I'm not going to assume anything, investing in people who are rappers, and you're just seeing tons of rappers. Everybody's like, and it was a fun time. Like that's, the time between like 98, 99, 2000, 2001. Like those are years where like, I kind of say like D12 was kind of running the city. Mm-hmm. Because the popularity of Eminem, then like D12 puts out an album and there's just this fun feeling around it. There's probably a lot of fucked up shit going on, and there's a lot of bad decisions being made. But it was a fun time, and that was sort of like where I was coming up to. I was going down to St. Andrews. I was meeting all these different people that just from the scene and everything, and it was just a fun time, just starting there.
Well, now we got to back up though, because you said a lot of bad decisions being made. What's one of those bad decisions?
The bad decisions that were being made is that Detroit hip hop never had anybody to guide people. Like, so you're having this big spotlight being shined on the city because of Eminem and because of other people. Slum Village's album would eventually come out. You'd have Royce the 5'9" being signed. You'd have all these people being signed, but none of these cats, there's so many of these cats that don't know what to do with themselves and how to handle themselves, how to handle hatred from people, jealousy, you know? So, and there's nobody to sort of like guide them past all of that, you know? So there's a lot of fights, a lot of guns being drawn, a lot of stupid shit that didn't need to like really happen, but like they were still sort of stuck in a street mindset,
Right.
even though the music industry, which is a corporate mindset, is looking at them.
It's also really interesting, you know, considering Detroit's legacy, that when it came to hip hop, there really was no, you know, Berry Gordy kind of corollary for Detroit hip hop. Like they always compared Russell Simmons in New York to Berry Gordy when
Right.
he was first starting Def Jam, but there was no great Detroit hip hop record label. They were great Detroit hip hop artists, but you know,
And even then, until like maybe the late 90s, I felt like Detroit music, like Detroit hip hop, was a little behind the times. But it wasn't until, I guess, I'd like to say this is an influence from Jay Dilla, is that once he started making music and making music with other people and kind of teaching other people, and a lot of this also is an influence from Amp Fiddler, also the godfather of Detroit hip hop. You know, he taught everybody, but it was when Dilla started doing stuff, you know, really doing stuff with like Tribe and De La Soul, and people were seeing that. People, you know, see that he was making money, that the artistry kind of caught up, you know, because if you go back to the, there's a lot of great records from like Detroit's Most Wanted and, you know, Awesome Dre and AWOL and Smiley and everything. But it just seemed to me that they were a little behind the times in sound, not lyrics, because everybody was rapping their asses off. But it was, even though everybody got signed to something, there was just something that was missing there that didn't like correlate to the next generation. We had that little time period, like in between that first wave and then the next wave, where there was kind of, we don't know what to do, you know. It was kind of like that time when it was the time in hip hop when Pete Rock came out, and the level of production went through the roof. You know, he showed a whole new way of you know, doing production. But we didn't have anybody in Detroit except Dilla, and it took a few years for him to really get caught on to really do that locally. You know, so there was this like a time when, yeah, we had the talent, but we were still making music that had the same samples, you know.
Right. Well, listen, let me ask you a question. So you characterize this period of time when you finally start poking around St. Andrews as the death rattle, but my question is, can you tell me a story that sort of is indicative of why being around all of this was like just so worth coming back again and again?
Oh man, it was like, the thing was, it was perfect because you were hearing all of the records. Like you could go anywhere in that building and hear all of the records that was hot in hip hop, in all aspects of hip hop. You could hear the Jay-Z or the 50 Cent, dude. Like when Get Rich or Die Trying came out, I guess like everywhere you heard like 2/3 of the album at any club night, you know, and you could hear those records. But then at the same time, you could hear like Slum Village demos or like every new like promo that came out. You know, I remember the night when House Shoes first played the demo that just dropped of MOP's Annie Up.
Wow.
Like that's a song now that you just feel like, you know, you don't live without. But I remember the first night of actually somebody playing that, like him literally getting I was at Record Time the day he got a package that had the Annie Up promo in it, you know, and I was there that night, and this is a joint no one's heard yet, you know. and we know what it would become, you know? And it was stuff like that, being able to hear like those records, like that we now are just, we still go nuts for.
Yeah.
You know, being played even before the album comes out, you know, the promo 12-inch, you know, that's what was so great about it. And you'd hear both that and on all forms, even like the, you know, the independent stuff, you know, you'd be like, oh, dude, oh, what's that? You know, it would be maybe some sort of like, you know, Raucous Records record, you know, or whatever, you know.
Right.
But that's what you're getting, you know, you're getting those promos like that we call classics now. Like
Discovery.
You got to hear the first, even like you even got to hear like the, you know, the demos of stuff, like House Shoes would bring like a CD deck or a tape deck or a DAT player or something, you know, just to play stuff that he wants to play from people locally, you know. So you heard new music during that time, even towards the end of, you know, like of St. Andrew's 3/4, you know, you heard like what was going on in hip hop that night, whether it's underground or mainstream.
Right. Now, there is a Detroit scene and it's a place. And then there's this other thing that's starting in the late 90s, this virtual space that's not bound by geography on the internet. And I believe around this time, 99, is when this website out of Philadelphia called OK Player opens its message board. So tell me a little bit about how you get involved in that community.
Oh man, like this is my thing, is that like I was so from the start like into like the hip hop culture on the net, because it was at the same time that I'm just like, I'm already going out and about, I'm learning about all this Detroit hip hop stuff, and like I found out about OK Player really quickly, you know, and I was on those boards and stuff like that. And
what were the discussions like for people who know OK Player as just one of a billion websites that focus on hip hop? Tell us what it was like to be on this very early version of OK Player, frankly, on a very early version of the internet when there weren't any hip hop.
Yo, the original, like the old school internet during that time was the greatest, man. That was like a great time, man. But like you could connect with so many people that were like-minded on the OK Player board. But at the same time, it's kind of like on the level of like, what if like hip hop Twitter was just on a message board like 20 years ago? Because they were having the wildest takes, the wildest like conversations, but then they would have good conversations. It was a hub to like share information. A lot of people connected with people. That's what, you know, that's what I did, you know, is like I connected with people, and I was one of the outlets for people for Detroit hip hop on that. And actually,
tell me some of the people who you encountered on that website.
Oh, like the people, let me see here. I would eventually like, and these are people that I met before they even put out stuff, you know, people like Flying Lotus or Nicolay or Byron Blaylock. Dude, there's, man, I even met Detroit people on there, I remember. And
Motown Girl, right? She was on there.
Oh yeah, Motown Girl and Kyle, Urban Cowgirl.
And of course, Questlove was very active, right?
Yeah, Questlove and Fonte, you know, Fonte too, and all these cats, you know, and you know, later on when I would actually have the website all done and everything, I would, you know, figure out more people that knew about that I didn't even realize I was interacting with. Right. But the funny thing was about OK Player was that the conversations about JD's music was the reason why I started the website. Was the reason why I started. Yeah, it was the reason why I started the discography. I made the discography first, and I even posted it on OK Player, and then I made the website later.
Interesting. So tell us about. So just to give everybody a kind of a primer, right? So obviously, JD, from coming out of Conant Gardens in Detroit, really gets his first big break when he meets Q-Tip, and Q-Tip kind of takes him under his wing and introduces him essentially to all of his native tongues and post-native tongues friends. So,
Yeah.
we're talking the De La's and Buster and Mad Skills and Far Side. And that is how JD gets introduced to the world of hip hop as a producer. And then Q-Tip actually invites him in, essentially, to become part of this production collective called the UMA, which in a sense is contiguous with A Tribe Called Quest. It was like being invited to become a member of A Tribe Called Quest.
Right.
And yet, in this time period when he starts working with Tribe, 96, 97, there is a change in Tribe's sound and in their albums, and there's some controversy about this. So tell us a little, since you were there.
Yo,
talk about it.
I always say that, like, the hot take that JD ruined, like, Tribe Called Quest, broke them up, is like the first real, like, internet hot take.
First bad internet hot take of the lifetime like the of bad hot take.
Real, but the reason why I started doing the discography was because of that. Because of he was under the UMA, so you didn't know what work he really did, because not everybody worked on every song. Because the UMA was him, Q-Tip, and Ali. But
and anything that they put out, it always said, just like the Tribe Called Quest stuff, it would always say, produced by a Tribe Called Quest.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know whether Ali or Q-Tip did the beat. It was the same thing for the UMA. It was always produced by the UMA, even if JD had done 90% or 100% of the beat.
And there's some that he didn't even do. He didn't even work on.
Right.
And at the same time, you were getting a lot of things that were UMA remixes, Tribe Called Quest remixes, and stuff like that. And then there's also a thing too, people really didn't. It happened a few times where, because JD is associated with Slum Village, associated with Barack Records, associated with RJ Rice. So there'd be things that would be labeled as, an RJ Rice mix that he did, or it'd be labeled as a JD mix that maybe RJ Rice did. There was things like that where there was, like, I don't know if there's too many producers that had to deal with that. When you look at their catalog, you had to actually pick apart who did what, Well,
so you felt in some way, this is really interesting to me, like you felt in some way as a fan, not really having hung out with JD much, right?
I never
met
him.
Fan, you decided that something needed to be done to find out what things this person JD had done, and what things he hadn't done.
Yeah, because there were so many topics of it on OK Player about, did JD do this, like blah blah blah, and I'm like, all right, let me figure it out.
And at the same time, you're experimenting with HTML and trying to design a website.
That's exactly what I'm doing. I just wanted to learn how to do a website. So, like, the first, like, Renaissance Soul website looked like just so basic and everything. And sidebar is that when I eventually did the website, I wanted it to be like Discogs. I didn't want it to just be a discography. I wanted to tell you about every pressing that existed for every one of these productions. So I had every vinyl promo, every CD promo, and stuff like that. Like on the original one, I would later scrap that, but the original version, like in my mind, it was like I wanted it to be like Discogs.
Right. And
I was like,
so sometime in, I remember you telling me the story that this website that you're creating happens in early 2001, and you launch it as a way to publish a JD discography, and you do it in conjunction with the release of the very first JD solo project, which is
whatever date that is.
Talk a little bit about that.
I always forget what date that is, whether it's in February or March. You probably know, but
yeah. Well, they again with these release dates, they're always soft, right? So it says late February, but it sounds like you probably would have done it in March 2001,
I think
right?
That was still back when, because Welcome to Detroit came out on BBE, which is a UK label. And that was back when UK release dates were different than US release dates still, So I think there was like a release date for like the CD, and then there was like a release date for the vinyl like a month later or something.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever the first release date was, that's when I dropped Renaissance Soul.
And how did you get an audience for this? How did you spread the word about this website?
Oh, basically OK Player. Basically OK Player. And actually to kind of go back a little bit on OK Player, another cool thing that came out of OK Player was that because one of the first people I met in the scene was One Below from the Subterraneous crew. And he would be on OK Player with a bunch of other people, and we would have these weekly hip hop meetings out in his place in Ypsilanti, like every Sunday, and there'd be a whole group of like us from OK Player that were around. A few people even drove in from Chicago, and it was people like Buff One was there, and Majestic Legend was there at times. Other members of like Athletic Mike League, other members of like Subterraneous crew, and we would just talk about hip hop and stuff like that. That was like another cool thing that came out of OK Player boards. And when I started developing the discography, what I was doing was these were my sources of information. I would hear about something, and then I would ask House Shoes. If he didn't know, he would call Jay. And then he would tell me later, I'm like, did he produce that or not? Another things I would do is I would search the internet for anything that said James Yancey, Jay Yancey, JD, Jay Dilla, any spelling of Yancey, because there's a lot of times when that was misspelled, and see if there's any writing credits that appeared online, whether it was like, whatever, any sites that had like that sort of information, even going on like BMI and ASCAP websites and stuff like that, and seeing if I could search things.
Wow.
Like I was doing that.
So you really did an incredible amount of research for this, not just searching the web, but you were 1 degree removed from James Yancey himself.
Yeah.
And House Shoes acted as a conduit for that information.
Yeah. And there'd be a lot of times Shoes would tell me about something that Jay told him, like something was coming out, and he'd be like, yo, Jay did this record, blah, blah, blah. Can you go find it? And this is before, Discogs was really popping as a marketplace. So, and this was before like when eBay was just auctions, and this is back when we had gem.com also. And then because at the same time, I was really starting to become more of a record collector too. I wasn't a DJ yet, but I was being a record collector. So I was finding all like the little record stores that were off the grid a little bit that no one really knew about. So like, taken to, for an example, like Crustacean, that Purple, the Tribe Called Quest mix. That was something that Dilla did that nobody knew about. Shoes told me about it. I found there's this website, in the UK, I think it's still around, called Action Records. They had the 12 inches for like £3.99, and I bought all of them. And me and House Shoes just split them, and it was stuff like that. I was doing like Shoes would tell me about a record, I would go find it, like online. And a lot of that was, me building the discography too, is that I was also looking for the record too. And so I have most of the discography on vinyl. Like there's a few things I'm missing, but of the stuff while he was still alive, like I got most of the stuff that's available on the format that it's available for. And like, that's how I built the discography.
Well, I'll tell you, what that work that you're doing and that you did was so important, because when we're we're living history right now, and we never know what it is that we're going to need to collect. I mean, I'll give you just a quick story from my first trip to Detroit to work with JD.
Yeah.
I brought a camera. I brought my notebook. But the only pictures I took were of me and Chino XL visiting the Motown Museum, because why would I need to take a picture of JD? I mean, he's my favorite producer, but I just didn't have the conception that I was the degree of genius and the degree of history that I was witnessing. So you were
right. Even
right.
I didn't, to a certain extent. I didn't know what I was doing.
Who would?
And
Who
it was
would,
just like,
right?
I remember one time, like years after everything we're talking about now, he called me, and this is back when I had just like a regular phone, and I was still living at my parents' crib, a regular phone with a regular answering machine, and he left a message on my answering machine, and I didn't save it. And I wish and I don't even know where that phone is now, you know, and I wish I still had it, you know. I'm like, every day I'm like, oh, I wish I still had it because it was a cool message. But I know, man, it was just like you're in there, you're in the middle of this something, then you don't realize what's eventually going to become and how important that work was.
But even looking for his father's stuff, it's like it's the same process of going through, looking for all the different spellings, the possible spellings of Yancey, Yancie, Yancy.
Yo,
you know, it's so it's great that you did that stuff, because now we have it and it will never go away.
and I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, I'm so glad like websites that like GeoCities and Tripod and stuff still have stuff up, because every once in a while I'll find something on there that I'm looking for. Like I'll be like, I need to know this wrestling card for a show I went to in '99, and for some reason somebody posted it on a GeoCities page. So it's stuff like that, you know.
So pretty soon after this, you actually you go from being sort of a participant in this larger OK Player community to you actually being a resource for JD and Detroit related material for the community of OK Players. So tell me a little bit about how you see that unfold.
The funny thing was like that was like a cool time in hip hop, because that's when you had Hip Hop Site, you had Underground Hip Hop, you had Sandbox Automatic, and at the same time, also Michigan was like I had a website, and then there's a handful of other people that had their own Michigan hip hop site, kind of covering their own peoples. You know, you had Detroit Rap, which started off stupid, but then somebody else took it over and made it kind of cool. That was Uncle P. And then there's DJKnice.com, and he had his own sort of stable of people. Then you had Subterraneous Records.com. That was One Below's website that my man Mosologist was the webmaster for. And there was a big community within that message board that also spilled over to the OK Player community. There was DJ Graffiti's breakbread.com, is break-bread.com. And I'm probably forgetting somebody, but then there's Tashir's website, which I'm blanking at right now. But we had a little community of Michigan hip hop, Detroit hip hop that was like that people were going to. We didn't have a ton of traffic, but it was such a niche like community of Detroit websites that we made like the hip hop community like pay attention to Detroit hip hop, and not just everybody was just pay attention to like Eminem, D12, Kid Rock, Jack White when it came to like music in general. And we were like, okay, there's all this other stuff, you know, and it became effective, you know. It was effective. We weren't getting tons of hits, but it became effective. And we were all, and a lot of us that were on those websites, we were also on OK Player. So we were, you know, participating in that community also and doing our thing with our specific group of like people that we wanted to promote.
Right. Did you like as the years went by, 2002, 2003, did you start to get solicited by like record companies, management, artists,
Oh, I got
ever
all,
drawn into that?
I got that from the jump, man, because it was like,
Wow.
because there was nobody that was advocating Detroit hip hop online than me and a few other people. So the moment I launched, I was already in contact with like ABB, or no, not ABB, but ABB later on, but BBE. I was in contact with Daryl over at Up Above. And he would send me like the fuck the police stuff instantly. Um, I was in contact with a lot of the people that weren't Detroit artists, like I mentioned earlier, but were fans of Detroit music, and it would eventually be like this. It was like the more it grew, like the more people like would send me stuff that was like Detroit related. Didn't matter if it was local or if it was like international. Like I was always in contact with Damian Hoynes from Groove Attack.
Of course, yeah.
And
Yeah.
he would send he sent me the original Rough Draft record. Like he sent me any record that was Detroit related, whether it had like Lax or Big Tone on it or anybody. Like if somebody like I have some like crazy like those like German cats that bought all those JD and Wajid beats, ASD and something.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
Berlin,
like
I think.
I have those records, man. Like, so I was in the middle like of I was getting all that stuff from the labels, but I also helped out to get people noticed by people. Like, I remember years down the line, I had a really healthy like collection of audio that you could listen to on the site. It was all like in real format, like real streaming,
Right.
and so
Real.
I always had a good healthy collection of that. But I had all like the original demos of Black Milk's Sound of the City. Like he gave me like 3 joints and he was like, "Fresh, put those up,"
That's great.
And not too far along after that, what's why am I blanking on his name from Fat Beats? That would become part of his band.
Fat Beats in New York, Fat Beats in LA.
Yeah, in New York. I'm looking it up for you.
You're talking Amir?
No, why am I blanking on his name? Bill Sharp. Okay. Eventually, Bill Sharp from Fat Beats, he would email me and he was like, how can I get in touch with Black Milk? I want to sign him. I want to talk to him. I love his music. So I was just like, I gave him his number and everything, blah, blah, blah. And not too long afterwards, like Black Milk was signed to Fat Beats for his Popular Demand album. And I was like, and then like, I actually still have the record. Like Bill sent me a copy of Popular Demand and he wrote on it, like, thank you for, hooking me up with, Black Milk and blah, blah, blah. Cause then Bill would, continue to work with Black Milk, be a part of his band as like his DJ and stuff like that throughout the years. So that kind of like, that started all with me. Someone like Big Tone, he literally told me one day, he was like Fresh, like without you, no one outside of Detroit would have ever heard my music.
That's
And
incredible.
like, you were the first person to, get people to, hear my music. There
Now
was,
you actually had a moment with JD at one point where he got to tell you how he felt about what you had done. Could you tell that story?
there was a couple, but like there was like the one was more like, okay, the first time I met him was like at St. Andrews, and I remember I was kind of like trying to like promote my website a little bit, so I made these cheap little cards, like, and I printed them out on my thing, and I was just passing them out. And all my boys that I became friends with at St. Andrews, they're like, just JD's over there, go talk to him. And I'm like, oh, I never met him before, and like,
And
so I'll
here
go
you are,
chat.
the guy who has made a website dedicated essentially to
Like,
preserving.
but to be honest with you, this is at a time where hip hop artists and everything do not know what to do with the internet.
Right.
A lot of people also thought, people like me are just bootlegging their music, and the only person who understood what I was doing was Fat Cat. Like, he was very supportive from the beginning, understood what was going to happen on the internet, and that, what I was doing was good. So I don't know so I go there and I chop it up for them for a little bit. No, big conversation or anything. But there was a time, like, down the road, I don't even know what year. It was around the time when he gave me when he left that message on my voicemail. So I want to say that it was probably around 2003. I was in college. Yeah, it was probably about 2003 maybe. And we talk on the phone. He was very appreciative of what I've done over the years. There was times, to be honest, like, he was kind of weird in regards towards me. I don't think it was anything personal. I think he was just weird in general. There's times when I think he could have like a really kind of a shitty attitude or foul attitude or a grumpy attitude.
Well, any of his friends would tell you that.
And like, there was just a weirdness, but like, this conversation I had with him, like, was actually really cool. And it was just like, he's very appreciative. We were talking about, possibly doing some things. No, that might have been like later down the line, maybe 2004 or 5 or something like that. Because I feel like after we had that conversation, it wasn't too long until you started having real health problems.
Right.
Because we were talking about like really collaborating with something online, and
didn't he say he was going to make you some theme music?
Yeah, man, he was gonna like I was like, yo, could you like make me some sort of a theme music for the website that I can just play at the beginning or whatever? And like, he was down with the idea, but it just like, I'd never gotten like touch with him after that.
Yeah.
And then that's when you start hearing things about like his health and everything.
Yeah.
And like, yes, that was probably like the one sort of like good conversation I had with him.
Right. And that conversation probably happened after he had moved away from Detroit. Because you had seen him at the Detroit Electronic Music Festival in 2004 when he came back, right?
Yeah.
And that was after that. Well, that's amazing to have that validation. I do know from stories from his California friends that they, he did get a laptop, when he was out there, and he did start to get hip to stuff that was on the internet about him. So that may very well have been a part of what he realized. A question for you: what do you think when you think about the apex, like the height of your activity and your positive feelings about doing Renaissance Soul as a website? When would that be? And tell us a story about that.
I think that would start to be like, the first few years were really good, like 2001, 2002. But I think it was like 2003 that was like really cool, because I was getting a lot of music, This is when J-Lib would come out. And I had a good relationship with Jeff Jank over at Stone's Throw. Right. Like, he was my contact over there,
Yeah.
And he would always send me stuff. Like, he would send me all the Dilla stuff, instantly. He would tell me about it. And I was getting all of this other, like all the other, I was just hearing about everything. And I was doing other projects with other people, whether it was just promoting their stuff or whatnot, being sort of a publicist even with other people. So like, around that time was giving me outlets to other things. Like, I started writing a column at this Toronto-based website called the Cyber Crib about Detroit music. and I did that for a little while, and that would actually, I would the funny thing was is that I was, like I said, I was doing like publicity and stuff. I was working, short term, doing publicity for King Gordy's album on Web Entertainment, and that's the label that like Eminem was originally signed with. That's like the label that the Bass Brothers and they own. And I was doing publicity for King Gordy's album, and the general manager there, Scott Guy, he was like, yeah, Real Detroit Weekly's looking for somebody like for their hip hop column. Do you know anybody? And I was like, oh, yeah, let me try that. Let me, I'll do that.
Right.
I was like, okay, I'm around enough things. And the Real Detroit thing was like, just really popped off really quickly. I was doing like I was doing monthly at first. Later on, they would redo everything and it would be a weekly thing, and it would be smaller, but it'd be weekly, and I didn't like that. But I was doing this like monthly column that I called The Loop, and like I talked about all the Detroit stuff on there, Detroit hip hop stuff, and I was doing like cover stories and stuff like that for Real Detroit, and I was continuing on with here and there. There'd be times when I would kind of take a break with Renaissance Soul, but I was always kind of doing something with it. And I think 2003 was a good year because it was just like we were seeing this new sort of boom, like in Detroit hip hop, and where Detroit hip hop was collaborating with people everywhere. It wasn't completely an insular thing, You had J-Lib, you had all these other things that Wajid was doing. People were finally getting out of their like Detroit little hole, and like we were seeing more of that. That was a good year.
Right. But you start to get more professional gigs at other, more established institutions. And would you say that sort of marks a bit of the waning of your work on Ren Soul?
Yeah, it would, because I was also starting to party much more in Detroit and actually get into DJing and stuff like that. And the website helped me get DJ gigs too. And it was just like I was kind of getting burnt out on a lot of it.
Yeah.
Because the more you start, the thing was, the more you start partying, the more you start just being out in the scene, the more you kind of got sick of it. And we're also seeing like a little bit of a decline also, I feel like, and I think hip hop had a weird time that time also, like between 2004 to 2006, and then even after, where what are we doing next? There was that big indie boom with like J-Lib and Mad Villain and everything else that was around that type of stuff in like 2003, 2004. But then things just got like, it was just starting to, a lot of things were just starting to get old, I think. I found myself going...
The death of Jay Dilla, you had the death of Proof, House Shoes leaves.
Yeah. And even before that, I found myself like going to, because I was DJing, and the hip hop scene really didn't give me my first opportunities to DJ. It was more like the dance music scene here in Detroit that, because I started making friends with that, and with that part of the scene. And I started like being more educated about Detroit techno, Detroit house, even like Detroit rock and indie pop and everything. I was finding myself going in those areas. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to like bring that into the Renaissance Soul like universe, but it just wasn't fitting, and I was like, but I'm kind of like into a lot of this stuff now. I need my kind of hip hop break. And then when Dilla and Proof passed, there was sort of like a black cloud in Detroit hip hop. Yeah. Like 2006, 2007, maybe even a little at 2008, where there was stuff happening, but nobody was just fully into it, you know. Everybody was, and for me, I totally almost exited out of that for a minute and was solely DJing in like the techno and dance music crowds for like all of 2007.
Right.
Because all of 2006, all I was doing was Dilla tribute parties. And
that had to be heavy.
yeah, it was fun at first, but then I realized everybody was just asking me to play Dilla sets, and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this, you know. So by the end of 2006, I was like starting to play more dance music, you know, and things that was hot at that time. That was, you know, still wasn't commercial stuff and anything, underground type stuff, but it was like, so.
Well,
That
I
marked
gotta ask.
a long time for me. Like even after that, I just kind of had like a disappointment kind of in the scene eventually, because it was just like I was going down this weird burntness, like burned out, going down a weird rabbit hole of just things that weren't satisfying.
Right. That makes complete sense. You know, and what you talk about, especially with regard to Dilla, is something that I've heard from many of his friends and supporters. That, you know, I wonder if you could. I have a couple more questions for you, but I wonder if before that, if you could reflect a little bit on when you see J Dilla, James Yancey talked about or celebrated in on the page or in events. You know, how does all that hit you? You know, because you reached a point, like you said, where just I can't do this anymore. How
Right.
When you think about how Jay Dilla is represented today and how he is thought of today, what are your thoughts on that?
A lot of it's just really corny, you know. It's just like, I'm like, who is this person that you're talking about, you know? Like, where are you getting this persona and thing that you're talking about?
Give
You
me an
know?
example. What's the persona that you hear about, and then who is the real person?
Oh, like for years there was this sort of like this like hallelujah sort of hippy dippy sort of thing that loomed around Dilla's legacy, that I'm like, nah, man, he was like a Detroit street cat, man. He like, you know, of course, you know, everybody knows he like going to the titty bars and stuff like that. And he was just like any other, like, you know, Detroit cat, you know, like he, you know, to a certain extent, all dudes from the city, all hip hop dudes from the city are assholes to a certain extent, you know, some more than others, you know. And he's just like that, you know. He just happened to have a really amazing music making ability, you know. And there was this like whole thing about it just got really corny with like the, you know, hallelujah, like love, and it was almost like, you know, the love movement, you know, or something
He's
like it was like,
portrayed as a saint, in other words.
yeah, it was this weird Satanist, like I don't know if it was like that, man.
No,
Like
you know, because I think,
he's a
and I've run
regular
into
dude.
it too, just researching and reporting the book. Is that, and this happens a lot of times to historical um, figures, but you know, just because you're sophisticated doesn't mean you're a saint, and sainthood is not the price for being sophisticated. He was an incredibly sophisticated, thinking,
Right.
intentional producer, but loved. He had grown up around a lot of coarseness, and he loved his pleasures, and you know, those two are not mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah,
Especially not in Detroit.
and it was weird just like the way a lot of people like kind of paraded his mother around after he was you know, after he passed away, when in all actuality he kept his parents away from his music most of his career, you know. He never let them go to any of his shows or anything. Like, I don't know if they ever did, you know, because he wouldn't let them, you know. He was kind of like they would, they would know about that, they were doing stuff in the basement or whatnot, but there was like you really, like for me, you can, if you want to, if you want to know about James Yancey, the boy, the man, the person, like, yeah, you can talk to Ma Dukes. But if you want to talk to Jay Dilla, the music, you really can't get much out of her, because he didn't let her around, And I feel like a lot of people are making this persona about his music, about him being a producer, based off what they're getting from her, which is kind of weird to me,
But
And
in all fairness, I think she cops to the fact that, a great story that she tells is whenever she would try to tiptoe down from the kitchen, down the stairs to hear what he was doing in the basement, because she genuinely liked the stuff he was doing and was
yeah.
genuinely proud of him. He would be like, what are you doing, lady? He would call her lady. Like,
But see, stuff like stories like that, people kind of forget or just kind of don't pay attention to, and kind of pick and choose what they want. And then over the years, you've had all these stories that get like passed down, and you're hearing them fourth person, and they're completely exaggerated, And like, I'm not saying I know any stories or anything, but a lot of this stuff just doesn't sound like him, It sounds very exaggerated, and you're like, and that's what a lot of the events and tributes like came to be, like after he passed, was like the sainthood or whatever, when all I wanted, and everybody, and it got to the point where the legacy of JD was something that they would hear all these stories, and then they want to repeat it to you, even though like, I know all this stuff, but there was kind of like people like wanted like their gold star for like knowing stuff,
Right.
And it was kind of hard to enjoy his music when people are always talking. I just want to be like, yo, let's just play some music and vibe to it like we used to do. Like I could be over at House Shoes spot, we'd be smoking some weed, and he'd play a beat tape, and we're just chilling. Like no words are being spoken, or, oh man, do you know what record he sampled on that, yo? Or he would show me, but now it turns into a big discussion, like, and I'm like, yo, can we just listen to the music? That's the big problem with the legacy, is that we just don't listen to Dilla's music. It always has to turn into a discussion.
All talk. I love it.
And there was also that level of policing where, like, people would, like, you would hear, like, maybe like a TV show or like a commercial would use something that Dilla produced. The first thing that would come out of someone's mouth, well, I hope his estate's getting money for that. And I'm like, to the point where I'm like, that's not our problem. Honestly, that's not my problem. I hope so too. But there's things about Dilla and his business and his music that, guess what? Not my problem. I'm focused on the music. And there's things that I just don't want to talk about, because it's not my problem, or I just want to chill and vibe to the music.
Yeah. All right. Makes complete sense. All right, so let me ask you a couple questions. Why now? Why is it important to you now to resurface the Renaissance Soul name, especially with regard to this podcast? What is it that you are reaching back for, and what is it that you are rebirthing?
Man, for a long time where I was like, yo, I'm not going to bring Renaissance Soul back in any way. I'm not going to use the name or whatever.
Why?
There was, because I didn't want to go back to that past. I just didn't want to relive the past for some reason. I don't know. Yeah. I really don't understand why. But for some reason, I always paid for the domain every year. I always paid for the domain.
They make it easy.
I was like, all right, I'll pay for the domain. But I just didn't want to go back to it because I didn't know how to. I had a lot of mixed feelings in hindsight about my time in the music scene, that I think I've been able to clear up over the past like 3 years by going, like, because I started going to therapy 3 years ago. And I feel like I've been able to come to terms with a lot of things that I thought I wish I did do during that time. Because I feel like I could have done more with like my, connections, my network during that time, but I just didn't know how to do it, and no one around me knew how to do it for themselves anyways. So there
Right.
wasn't like this sort of idea like nowadays you have like everybody and their mother that are like with their professional hacks, and you have the Tom Billios of the world and stuff like that, who tell you how to like get your mind together for business and everything. We didn't have that shit back then, and like or access to it or anything. And there was just a lot of like toxic thought back then, whether it was, you know, cats still thinking they're still on the block, or, misogynistic, thoughts, homophobic thoughts, like all those sort of attitudes was so like prevalent back then that it was just like, I don't really want to go back to that time,
Right.
and I've moved on. But then I kind of like started, I think this was kind of like something a lot of people have gone through over the past few years, where they realize the music industry isn't the same anymore, that we have all these tools that we can do it for ourselves. They've given up on the dream record deal and stuff, the rap dreams or whatever, and they started making music again that was fun for them. And a lot of people are making the best music they've ever made out of their lives after reconciling a lot of shit in their lives. We're seeing Big Tone make the best music of his life. You're seeing Royce the 5'9" make the best music of his life. House Shoes is able to put out a whole record label full of very talented producers and whatnot. You're seeing people who are finally doing the thing that they wish they were able to do like 15, 20 years ago. And they're even better at it than they were back then, and that's where like kind of like I became. And the funny thing is about this, like my other podcast, my main podcast, Fresh is the Word, I'm in the 200s now, but I don't think I really started finding my sweet spot until after 70 episodes. And then I took like a 6-month break. That's when I started going to therapy. And then I started sort of branching out to a lot of different things that made me like learn more about myself, whether it was like, you know, um, like like sex podcasts, or more stuff about, podcasts about the Black experience, or, just other forms of music, having, interviewing rock bands, doing like all those other things. And the thing was, during this time that like I was kind of a little, I stepped back from the hip hop scene and just the music scene in general. I was still doing stuff because I was a contributor for Huffington Post, and I was doing that while I was in a really bad relationship for like 3 years, like 3 years of like Huffington Post thing was from like 2011 to 2018. From 2012 to 2014, I was in this bad relationship, and and just writing for Huffington Post kept my name out there, and I was actually still building my name, maybe more than I was before during that time.
Right.
So that's after all of this, it was just like I started kind of reminiscing about a lot of things, and I was like more. I was more resolved about it than I used to be. And there was a wrestling podcast. Well, there's a few wrestling podcasts that were one was with one's called 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. He used to be the head of WCW wrestling in the late 90s. And what they would do, and the guy that runs who hosts the podcast with him, Conrad Thompson, he did two other ones with other wrestling people. And what they would do was they would take a specific topic, whether it be an era, a pay-per-view, a particular wrestler, a particular show, and they would break down everything in regards to that topic. And I realized, I'm like, yo, I want to do that, but for like Detroit music, you know? And like, that's when like the gears started rolling in my head about like doing this podcast, is because like I wanted to take a topic from the past and then break down everything about it, you know.
So that's the idea behind this new Renaissance Soul podcast.
Yeah. And then recently I realized, you know what? Let's not just do it about history. Let's do it about significant releases that are happening now. Because there's some, and I got that idea kind of with Miss Corona's album, her EP called the Virus EP. And this is someone who's like, like we're going through a pandemic with a virus called the coronavirus. She's wondering if she should change her name. And then she puts out this EP that is very smart.
Yeah.
It talks about like everything going on from the eyes of a Black woman, the Black community. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to wait to talk about this. I want to talk about this now, you know? So, and I've done it with other artists too. Like I did Big Tone and House Shoes' album, because there was so much about that record that talked about Detroit hip hop history.
Right.
And then I also did Apollo Brown's album. Why am I forgetting? Sincerely Detroit, because that's historical, because it has so many different Detroit artists on one album, and that would have never happened like in my day back then. That would have never happened, you know. So to me, that was a historical thing. So historical things can be new, you know. Right. So I wanted like to touch on those. So that's the word historical is going to be like the center frame of Renaissance Soul, whether it's older stuff or newer stuff, and it's going to be through all genres, you know, because I've experienced all the scenes here in Detroit.
Right. Well, so what are some episodes that you're currently planning, if you can share that?
Oh, I already like the thing is with I've recorded so many episodes for this, and let me bring my. And the thing is, also, I wanted to like go outside the box a little bit with the episodes too, and kind of, it almost speaking, like have some episodes that were almost about theory, if that makes sense. Like the theory, like I have an episode with a graphic designer, Mario Butterfield, like, you know, Skinny Boy. You would like a lot of the Detroit releases you see. Like if you look at the packaging, you know, Mario Butterfield, you know, did the cover. So we have a whole conversation about the branding and the look of Detroit, how he came to be, because Detroit's kind of a hard thing to brand because there's so many different styles, and we don't have a singular hook to any of it, you know. Like down south, you had at one point you had crunk music. That could be something that you could, you know, really market. But Detroit didn't have like one thing, you know. Then also, another episode that I was so happy to be able to do is do an episode about the Dead Flowers album from Esham back in 1999. This is like 1995. You know, to me, that's one of the most influential albums to like street rap in Detroit, like of all time, you know. Plus Esham's one of my favorites of all time, so it was like that was I interviewed him once before, but like that's the first time me and him got to do like a one-on-one, and that was like fantastic. I also talked with Wendell Harris from Tribe Records, the jazz crew from back in the day, and he's still making music and everything. And earlier this year, Strut Records put out an album of Tribe Records from a certain period, and we kind of talk about what was going on in Detroit during that period. Also, I do an episode about Fat Father's new album. That's
Mm-hmm.
cool to hear because like he's actually a good father, like he's like a cool like dad, and we talk about how hip hop and being a father, being like, hip hop was always told as, a young person's game, but we talk about how it is to be a father and a little bit older. Then I also talk with Fred Thomas, who's the band leader of the band Saturday Looks Good to Me, and they were a favorite of mine when I started, dipping into like the indie rock, indie pop sort of Michigan things, and like that album was like so super cool because, and even when we were talking, it was another one of those things where there was all these people he collaborated with, and you can go listen to their albums, and they had cool albums, So it's stuff like that. Like that's like most of the stuff that I'm that I already have recorded, and I have just like a ton of other ideas in my mind. It's going to be like, it's going to be things where we just talk about, and I want to know about like everything during that time. I want to know what those people were going through during that time, what their life was like just every little nut and bolt story of everything. And I eventually want to get to it where I'm doing very obscure releases, like stuff that like, why would anybody even listen to this episode? Like stuff that's like, why would you even care to even get these people together to talk about that? But it would be something that I love totally.
But the conversation makes it interesting. So listen.
Yeah.
I have one more important question for you, and that is, to you, what does it mean to be from Detroit? What does it mean to be a Detroiter, and why is that important to you?
I think being from Detroit is like, I think it gives you a really good like work ethic. You're already like, we're a working class area. We're a part of the the Industrial Revolution. That was like in our in our DNA. But like at the same time is like, it can be, the Detroit area can still be a bit like separated, segregated to be a better word. Detroit's a really, it's heavily black. You have Dearborn, which is the biggest Arab population outside the Middle East. Then you have little pockets of other nationalities and stuff. And so you get these sort of like tastes of knowledge and culture that necessarily isn't the mainstream version of anything that's deemed like ethnic or cultural. You kind of get like the underground sort of version, and it just, you just kind of like Detroit, like someone once told me this, and it really kind of, I'll even, it's Cornelius Harris of Underground Resistance, like their manager. Yeah. He once told me that like the Detroit is like the future. Like if you want to experience what might happen everywhere else, look at Detroit. And that means everything, whether it's growth or poverty. If you want to find out a way, you want to find an example of what might happen in your city, look in Detroit, because we kind of experience everything, and it always kinds of looms around still. We see the after effects of anything that's ever happened. So Detroit's kind of a place where both history and present are always kind of exist, and there's still a battle between both of those.
Yep. Man, K Fresh, I wish you all the best on this new launch, man. I'm so honored to be able to ask you a few questions about it and to thus be a part of it.
Thank you for listening to the Renaissance Soul podcast, hosted and produced by myself, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier, empowered by Anchor at anchor.fm/Renaissance Soul. Renaissance Soul theme music provided by Steve O. You can find more of his productions at iamsteveo.bandcamp.com, and that's EYEAMSTEVEO.bandcamp.com. Renaissance Soul is available on all streaming platforms. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. If you want to support Renaissance Soul, please consider pledging via Patreon at patreon.com/freshtheword. Follow Renaissance Soul on social media, on Instagram at RenSoulPodcast and on Twitter at RenSoulPod. And join the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/freshtheword. And for more information on Renaissance Soul, visit freshthepodcast.com. Thank you for listening and your support. Goodbye and good night.
Renaissance Soul.